Okay, so I'm coming in to this output of week 3 Learn Together about the beginning of week 2. And I like to just kind of after I've done this and kind of thought about what my code would look like and things I'd want to do to it. And I'll cover my code in a minute. And I think, honestly, one of the things I didn't do a great job of in here was to talk about just how to submit this. Okay. But I did go over at the end how to acquire the Git hack link, right? And so here is my Git hack link. But I'm actually going to run it locally, okay? I did change one thing, I think. So I run um, some code called live server, and live server basically just does that. It creates a server on my local system. Now I could just right click and open in my Finder or in File Explorer the index file and do it from there. And as I showed last time, but the reason I like to run live server is that whenever I make changes, it automatically, and I'm going to go ahead and inspect here, it automatically updates my page. So, that's just something, again, I'll probably, if you want to know more about that, let me know. I could chat about it. Okay, so in this case, I've gone over, right, I've added an H1 into my HTML, I added my div, I added my script tag, which I do want you to name it app.js, so there's nothing new there. What I did in my code is I decided to play around with this, right, display on page concept, but I did it because I also wanted to display the input data. So what I did is I set up my first line that actually calls the display on data, passing in the 3 variables: filing status, suggested income, and number of kids. And then I just called inside of this function display on page by passing it a template string. Okay, and then I said, and this is where when you look at code like this, when you first look at it, it might be like, what is this doing? Because once it calls display on page, so then it's calling this function, outputting to the page this template string, and then it comes back and it's going to do a return, but it won't return until it gets the results of calling determine amount by passing in those same arguments as parameters into this function. Okay. Now there's other ways I could have done this. I could have just called it, set a variable inside of this function, and then return that value. But I decided I wanted to do it just kind of in one step. I thought after reading it and me explaining it, maybe it would make more sense. Okay, and then I went ahead and I could have done the same concept of actually once you return calling output. So I actually could eliminate these two as well by handling it in my code. But I decided not to, just for this example. The reason I said let check amount and let output, and then the second time when I determine check amount for the second time, let's see if you know in your head why I didn't say let. And that's because I'm just giving you a moment to think about it. Said it's already defined. And so I'm just updating its amount. I'm assigning a new amount to that, but it's a variable name I've already declared. Okay, so the key to this, and I want to say this, not the key, but one of the important things I want you to get used to is looking at the source. Again, here's my app.js. I'm going to set a breakpoint here. I'm going to refresh the page. And now I'm going to use my step, okay, to step into each line. So I can see here, I'm calling display input. I'm passing in the string, the integer, and the integer, which then becomes variables that are defined in this local scope. Okay. Let me actually increase this just a little bit. So because we don't need to see, you can see the output over here. Then I step into that. And it actually does now pass that template string, which is one of the things we've been using concatenation for string output. And really the more modern way is to use this template idea. And then you can just inject into your output the variables. And it's just, I think, a much cleaner way of handling strings. There's other benefits, of course. And now I'm just going to call that display on page. Again, this is my H1 that I have in my index, so this does not change. This stays the same. It's my header concept. And now I've outputted just the input data that I was given, and then I'm going to return, but my return, and this is what I was talking about before, so let me actually bring this down just a little bit so you can kind of see what it's going to happen. This is the line that as I was talking about, you might look at it and go, what is that? So where I'm actually, oh, no, I'm not. You can tell what line I'm on and what line we started from. Like this is where I said this is my break point. This is where I'm currently the line I'm executing. So when I hit step, then it actually is calling, invoking, passing in to determine those same variables. It runs through its logic. It returns, okay? Now what gets returned here is actually whatever the output, the return value here was. So whatever that amount is then gets returned to what called it. And in this case, becomes check amount. So if I look at check amount, I can see it's 0. Okay, and that's because I modified my adjusted income to make sure I was hitting that branch of my logic. Okay, and I'm now actually outputting based on the check amount. And I can see that now I'm using that. And that's really the most powerful thing you can learn about function is that once you set up a function, you can call it, and you want to be able to call it multiple times, because in programming, you're often just doing the same thing repetitively. So putting things in a function and handling the return values is kind of just, it's very much of what the tools that you use for programming. So in this case, now we're just going to keep running through it. So more than anything, I just wanted to give you a little bit of like what my code was doing. I have a link to my GitHub, why I did the things I did. Your code will and needs to look different. Hopefully you've spent a little time thinking about how you do this. And again, I think the part I probably didn't do as well is I didn't say you had to use my function of display on page, but you will see that display function here on my example that I covered. And now if you click in this link, right, even though you're just in here, matter of fact, let me show you what I mean by that. You can just in this DevTools, you can just copy this right here, okay? Now, I'm going to go over this function, and you will learn as we move forward in this class what this code is doing. But really simply, it's just passing in whatever string I give it. It's setting up a P with this. This is, and if you right click and inspect, you can see that actually this is a P tag inside of my output that gets generated by my JavaScript. So and then what it does is it actually sets a P, and then it says whatever that element, in this case EL means element, then set its text content to message, then set output equal to, and this is just points to that output div that we created, and then append to that output div. And really what that's pointing to here, it's easier to see when I'm looking at it here, is this output div here, and that's how it creates through code or injects into the page that's already created its output right here. So when we're looking at this output, and generally you'll see this in the future, I actually set these things typically at the top of the page, but not a big deal here. So it says output that div, then append the EL, the element, which is really just a P tag that is now got the message I wouldn't say injected into because the DOM is already sitting there. Anyway, a lot of terminology. It's good to learn how to talk about these things in your own understanding. And if you want more about that, come see me. That's really where the benefit of you and I talking about this stuff hopefully will help. Okay, talk to you later.